Okay, I will call the meeting to order. Welcome everyone to our Williamsport City Council work session. It's Thursday, February 20th. We're in Train 2, third floor. So this is a work session to go through a presentation on the preliminary report on the City Hall cost analysis, essentially. Just a quick little backstory. It was about a year ago, I think, when we put out an RFP for architecture firms, got a lot of responses, went through a selection process, ultimately awarded it to BKV Architects in April, May timeframe, somewhere in there. They got to work pretty quick. We did a kickoff, I think, in like late May. We had an update meeting, I want to say August, September timeframe, in ERC. And now here we are with a preliminary report on the City Hall. There's going to be a number of options that they're going to present to not only council, but the members of the public that are here tonight. What we're going to do here is I'll turn this over to Kelly and her team here in a minute. It's a short agenda, but I certainly suspect it'll be a fairly robust conversation across the board. So members of council, when we have the presentation, we'll keep it pretty informal. So if there's questions that members have related to anything in the presentation at that time, by all means ask any kind of clarifications, thoughts, that kind of stuff. Second item is comment from the public. We want to try to get a little bit of feedback from the public on what they see here tonight. Any kind of thoughts, ideas that maybe weren't thought of, that kind of thing. Looking forward to hearing that feedback. And then I have an item on here if we need it for, discussions, any kind of thoughts on next steps, any final things we think we need to see. This is not a voting meeting tonight. This is simply information presenting, gathering, having a dialogue about what we have in front of us and the issue, and to talk about next steps in a public forum. But we're not making any decisions tonight on anything. We're not voting on any actions. We're not taking any actions on anything. I want members to be clear, the administration to be clear, and the public to be clear on that. Okay. So I will turn it over to Kelly, who has joined us from BKV in Minnesota.
Yes.
Welcome. Thanks for traveling here. We're grateful to have you. I know there's a couple members of the team that are on Zoom as well that were integral in this. I'll let her kind of introduce them and transition over to them.
Perfect. Well, thank you to the council for giving us the opportunity to present our findings from the report from the City Hall and Police study. My name's Kelly Naylor. I'm a partner at BKV Group, and we're a national practice holistic design firm, which means we've got architecture, interior design, structural, mechanical, electrical designers in-house, as well as landscape. With me tonight, because we've got groups in all of our office, experts that we brought to the table for this study. Craig Carter is on the line with us, and each of them are presenting a portion of this material to you tonight. Craig's actually the partner in charge. He and his wife had a baby 2 days ago, so that is why he is not here. So he has a good excuse.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
Yeah. Paul Michelle is also online with us, and he is one of our national government sector practice leaders who has a focus on public safety planning. And then we've also got Joe Brown, who is one of our experts on historic preservation. And so they were all part of the study. And I should say my role is focused on City Hall planning. So we each bring a little different aspect to the study. As Councilmember Yoder mentioned, the purpose of this when we were brought on was to initially really assess the historic City Hall building, see what condition it was in, and how we may be able to utilize it for City Hall. In addition to that, we did a space needs study to really take a look at what was required both now, and then we projected out 10 years and 20 years for City Hall staffing and support spaces. And I think you've all seen the report that we provided that quantifies the square footage allocations that we provided for both of those building types. So I think we'll get started here. And actually, I should say, we want to keep this informal. So as we're going through the presentation, if you have questions along the way, feel free to ask. So I'm going to start with the existing facilities, and I'm going to have Craig and Joe led the charge on reviewing the historic facility. So Craig, do you want to speak to this a little bit?
Thank you, Kelly. I'll talk just a little bit about this. For the first thing we did really with the study was to look at the existing City Hall structure and try to determine what value it had, whether it could be retained and utilized. We'd heard some things early on in the process, in the media and stuff like that as we were researching this project that had us concerned at the state of the building, and when we showed up on scene with our multidisciplinary team, I think that there are certainly a lot of problems with it, but ultimately that where the rubber meets the road is we don't think that there's any deal breakers. There's nothing wrong with the existing building that can't be overcome through a remodeling project, and that's probably the most important statement that we can make about it. On the right-hand side of the slide, you can kind of see the way that maybe BKV Group thinks about the level of quality or remaining useful life of the existing building systems as they stand right now. But remember that the bulk of the remodeling has last happened in the 1970s, and there's been some piecemeal fixes here and there over the course of time. But I'm going to talk briefly about some of these things, and I'm going to ask Joe to step in and talk about a couple other things here. Generally speaking, the exterior enclosure is in pretty solid condition. A little bit of tuck pointing is necessary. The historic windows are in surprisingly good shape for their age and just needs a little refurbishment at that of those things. The roof has been recently redone, and so that's in pretty good shape. That's not to say that there's nothing that needs to be done with the roof or that you might not want to do with the roof here and there, especially with the guttering sort of system, but by and large the roof is in really good shape, and so what that really leaves maybe is some of the exterior doors are in rough shape, and those would need to be replaced, but there's not that many doors in a building. It's mostly, as you guys know, roof and walls and windows. So generally speaking, the exterior enclosure is really pretty good. I'm going to skip over a couple of these things and say that the building structure itself, the supporting walls and joists and floors, our structural engineer was very pleased with all that stuff. And he basically sees no reason why the building can't be remodeled to support a functioning city hall. There's just basically nothing wrong with the structure. As I mentioned, maybe a little bit of tuck pointing on the exterior wall where we have masonry load bearing, but that's pretty small potatoes, all things considered. When we get into the mechanical, the plumbing, the electrical, telecommunication, all those types of systems, basically we're looking at a complete replacement. There's not much there that's worth saving. And when we're looking at a remodeling project, it's more than likely that you would want to replace all that stuff anyway, because as you remodel the inside of a building, the walls move, the ceilings change around. You need to redo a lot of the ductwork and the lighting and the power and whatnot anyway. So it's not a big surprise that you would want to replace all that stuff in a remodeling project. This just reinforces that it really hasn't been significantly upgraded for a really long time. Most of the equipment is past its expected useful life, and so it should be planned to just kind of replace all those sorts of things. From an accessibility side of things, that was another one of my roles on this project was a review of that. I think the largest problems you're facing with the facility from an accessibility standpoint are going to be addressed by the remodeling that you would need to undertake to move back in there. And that leaves maybe a couple of things that you need to fix on the outside, namely parking and a couple of the doors and signage and things like that. Although the addition of the ramp on the front side of the building has alleviated a lot of the biggest concerns with public bidding access into the facility. So even on the accessibility side of things, while there's work to be done, a lot of that just is in the remodeling that's going to be necessary, and that'll resolve all of those issues. So, and I'll ask Joe to speak maybe a little bit about the historic elements and maybe the interiors that aren't so historic, and what might be good and bad about those.
Sure. Like I said, most of the exterior is in good shape. Over the years, there hasn't been, windows added here and there, or filled in, or pipes run out, like we see in kind of factories or brewery type exteriors. So that's in good shape. And then when you enter in the building, in the first floor, that lobby is beautiful, as you know. That's in good shape. But the rest of that first floor, besides I think it was formerly the chief of police's office, which is kind of in its original state. But the rest of the first floor is part of a remodel, outside of what would be the period of significance, and would be open to the ability to modify as needed. The same would be said about the basement level, with the exception of that front area that's accessed by the exterior stairs, with some of that kind of colonnade type space being original. The rest is work that was done during subsequent remodels, and would be able to be remodeled as needed. The second, third floors, though, are in pretty much their original shape, with the corridor, a lot of those doors, and then the interior spaces with beautiful wood detailing, let's say. So the kind of the lower level and the first floor, there's a lot that can be done with remodeling, and then the second, third, you need to maintain the corridor for the most part. And depending on the review, even that, whether the extent of that could be up for debate as well.
So the next item we looked at were really the functional needs, and this was related more to the space needs of both the city hall and the police department. So the process that we go through is we met with every single department. You can see listed at the top of this spreadsheet. We toured their existing spaces, talked to them about their operational flow. But when we start any space needs assessment, we try to come in with fresh eyes, and the intent is not to just simply document what you already have. We really like to understand the roles of all the positions. Who needs a private office? Who doesn't need a private office? Right now, I think, you guys are, the city hall is in multiple different locations. So there's sort of little siloed offices, and I think you've sort of taken over existing space. So there's all sorts of different sizes of offices and workstations. So this program represents creating more standards across the city hall positions for both offices and open workspace. The part of the findings here, and you'll see there's a summary. The first column is the projected current need for City Hall, so 25,700 square feet. You can see as we project out to 20 years, it's 27,344. It's not a huge amount of growth. So that growth is representative of some additional staff positions over a 20-year span. So it's fairly minor, but that's mainly where that growth is. I think I'm going to flip to the police department, and Paul, maybe you want to talk a little bit about the summary here.
Thing. So very, very similarly to the way Kelly helped the team work through the city hall spaces, we did the same thing with the police. And this was a a look at the current need to sort of establish a baseline, not respective of what they currently have, but what they should have to operate effectively in accordance with national standards and law. And that really sets the baseline. Again, looking at this from the standpoint of, what should they reasonably expected to have to do their work in the most efficient manner possible for the staffing they're authorized to have. So similarly, we looked at the out to 10 and 20 years, and we have a little bit of a bigger increase here. Mostly it's related to sort of the growth of patrol for both people and for fleet, as well as, positions that are emerging in the industry that are becoming more and more standard that currently aren't there. So we're really looking at how is the department going to operate long term with respect to some of those initiatives in the law enforcement industry. And we look at this from the standpoint of national standards, but we're also listening to how this department actually operates, and every department is different. There's no cookie cutter approach here. But it is an approach to look at standards and then see how those apply to the unique ways that the Williamsport Police does in fact operate. So again, we start off at 67,000 square feet in total for the current needs, and then that projects out to 70, just a hair over 77,000 thousand square feet for that 20-year need. Now, that does not mean in either case for City Hall or police, it does not mean that the building is instantaneously obsolete at 20 years. It just means, based on what we know, that's a reasonable planning period. I mean, things will certainly evolve and change over time.
We lost him.
Nope. Can you hear me?
Okay, a reasonable
Can you hear me?
projection.
Can you hear me, Kelly?
For what it's worth, Paul, I can hear you just fine.
Ditto.
Okay. Maybe it's something's not connecting in the City Hall.
Yeah.
Kelly, let us know when you can hear us. I'm gonna go ahead and send a message here.
I'm typing it into the chat she
Okay.
told us not to use. So
I believe they dropped off. We were having computer issues earlier today,
okay.
Okay.
so we might have to call in.
We can certainly do that. Give it a moment
Yeah.
here, maybe.
Give it a moment.
I'll text the mayor. Let him know we're waiting.
Okay, thank you.
the first one that we looked at for City Hall was obviously to renovate the historic building. Did you get him back on?
Yeah, we're back on.
I think we're back on.
Okay. So Paul, maybe we can circle back to this.
Yeah. I just had one other point I was going to make. And it really was, the 20-year projection is really the most reasonable point to look out to. Anything really beyond that, it's really a bit of speculation. And if if these departments grow faster than another, it just means that perfect fit happens a little earlier. And if they grow a little slower, that perfect fit happens a little bit later. But these buildings are we all recognize that these buildings will last 50 plus years. So, good planning for expansions and flexibility for renovations to adapt to those long-term needs we just don't know about is part of the planning process as well. We can move on from there. Unless there are questions.
Paul, the question that was asked was just looking at the overall programmatic square footage size, the 20-year projection, that it's a large building. And is this in alignment with national standards? Why is it the size that it is? What's really driving primarily the square footage?
It is I would say not atypical for the size of the department that we are working with here. I'm really it's looking at staff growth, and we started off with 59 authorized total personnel, and then the projection with some patrol growth is really where some of those things happened. It projected out to about 85 total people. So most of that is in patrol, and looking at the way that the police department is going to respond to the city and the areas that potentially for growth. I was going to look at the records was the other area that had a fair amount of growth, and there were there's going to be a need, especially with freedom of information, FOIA requests and other things along those lines. The record specialists will become much more needed moving forward, because we just don't see. I mean, it's the spike in those kinds of requests for records and Freedom of Information Act submittals is just it's ballooning, and we could see it going to continue to do so. Other areas where there was growth was looking at things like crime analysts have become much more and more vital to sort of the predictive policing models, and then investigating. As the city grows and the department grows, obviously your investigations agent, your detectives will need to grow as well. So it really is driven by people and then the spaces that they need to operate. So with the growth on the patrol side being really where the majority of it happened, that's some additional office space, additional locker space, additional space for the fleet, and that really was what was driving it here.
Paul, if I can ask another question.
Absolutely.
So, clearly the fleet parking garage is not currently there, right?
Correct.
But other than that, what in here is what is listed as proposed in this that we currently don't have? Because I suspect there is some, and I know a couple things, but I'll also I don't know all of that. So I'm just kind of curious what else is new in this.
It's probably, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You're good.
I would say a lot of times it's the training functions, things like having proper space to do physical fitness training, to do tactical training, sort of the hands-on training, being able to do real world scenario training, firearms proficiency. These are things that, if you don't have them, you have to go somewhere to get that training. And if you have the facilities necessary to do the training, whenever it's convenient, that means the training is actually going to happen much more frequently. And it's muscle memory. It's the ability to practice again and again and again, to just be able to instinctively and quickly react when you need to in what can be a very hostile work environment. So we really advocate for training. It is a standard in the industry. And the things that those are some of the things that currently really don't exist. And I was well, the other thing that I was going to say was this is reflective of taking really a disparate organization in 4 different areas and bringing it all into one. So that also will improve the efficiency of the department from the standpoint of road miles and inefficiency of moving from facility to facility and really creating a cohesive department that for a city your size and a department your size really should not be split up between multiple facilities. It really should be under one roof for the most efficiency in their day-to-day operations. The fleet garage, I'll come back to that one. Pennsylvania winters aren't that different than Chicago winters or Minnesota winters or any other of these other northern states. And the fleet garages are a wonderful thing to have from the standpoint of not having to clear snow and ice from vehicles before you go out on the road. Sometimes the equipment in these vehicles are more costly than the vehicles themselves. So being able to maintain that equipment and that investment in the fleet and the equipment in the cars will reduce the frequency that those vehicles need to be replaced. Sometimes there's medical supplies in there that really does need to be in a temperature controlled location. The alternative is and a lot of times is to leave cars running. And that again is wear and tear on the vehicles and reduces the lifespan of the vehicle. So it is some investment up front, but over the long term, your year-over-year operating cost and your sort of your capital improvement plan associated with replacement of vehicles and equipment, you should see some benefit there. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that answers my question.
I have a couple.
Yeah, please, Mr. Allison.
Well, one observation, our county and our city are losing population gradually, but so we're trending in an opposite direction of, I think, the status quo, at least, not really adding a whole lot. But at some point, I'd be interested to hear from our chief of police with some of the dynamics that he's dealing with and how that fits in with some of this.
Yeah,
That'd
certainly.
be appropriate.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly. And I mean, I'll just say, my question's really, this was one of the most insightful pieces of this report from my perspective. I'm not a public safety professional by any means, and Chief and I have had a dialogue before about what these national standards are and kind of like how they equate to operation of a city. And this kind of helps answer some of that. So yeah, this is starting to kind of quantify a little bit of what you're talking about of what the impact could be looking like and kind of what they're working with now. So
Yeah, not to say that this is invalid, but
yeah,
I'm having a hard time seeing the square footage at that level.
Yeah. Mr. Mackey.
Yeah. How are you tonight?
Good.
I'm just curious, and anybody from BKV can answer this. The course of this study, do you take into consideration the financial state of the city that you're trying to do these studies for? Because 85 officers, that's never going to happen here. I think we all know that. So I'm just curious, like this is very interesting information, but it feels like it's kind of happening inside of a vacuum. Like nobody's paying attention to what's going on in Williamsport with these kind of projections, right?
Well, let me, Councilmember Mackey, if you don't mind, I can kind of take a stab at that, and that, I wouldn't mind Paul kind of filling in a little bit of nuance as well. Our general approach to studies of this nature, whether it's city hall or police or some other municipal facility, is to approach the in this particular step, this functional needs, and determining how much square footage the department needs to operate, effectively, efficiently, with some room for growth. We take a look at this on the basis of national standards and trying to program an optimal facility, with the understanding that always with the understanding that the facts on the ground might be different than what this kind of optimal facility would indicate, right? So, we're going to take a look at, for instance, we're going to take a look at some examples on the city hall side of things where, we can get maybe pretty close to an optimal solution, but we can't quite get there. We can't quite achieve it, and maybe that's we haven't written that option off. That might still be the best option for the city of Williamsport, but the understanding is that once we know what the optimal space needs are and or the optimal budget or whatever, there's a reality that needs to be discussed as one of the next steps. And so this is not to say that there's that your future police station needs to be 77,048 square feet, and then there's no wiggle room. There's no ability to reduce that number or try to find cost savings or things like that. We're just saying that that's, based on the discussions we had with each of the departments, and, on City Hall, we talked to the treasurer and finance and HR and administration and et cetera, and in the police department, we talked with administration and about all these other various topics and whatnot. And the feedback that we got on a kind of sub-department by sub-department basis or division by division basis is what's reflected in this program. And so that's why the numbers are where they're at. But not to say that there's, so yes, we did talk to, people in Williamsport about it, but I think the financial realities is one of the next steps. It's not the step we're talking about right now.
That answer your question, John? And Mr. Pulizzi.
No, if I may, just to answer a little bit to Councilman Mackey's question. I believe, what is it, page 8 here of your report? Correct me if I'm wrong on the page, but regarding the funding discussion, that the combined costs approximately House, City Hall, and Police Department are estimated to range between $64.1 million to $82.8 million in 2024 dollars. Is that correct?
Correct.
That helps. Thank you.
We'll walk through that in greater detail here. Okay. So we'll move to the different development scenarios, and we had 3 different development scenarios for the City Hall and 3 for the PD. So each of these, what we did was, and the reason why we did the programming space needs assessment was we needed to understand the space that you needed, and then we looked at each of these different options and began laying out the buildings so you could see how these could be functionally organized. So the first scenario was to renovate the historic City Hall. And Craig, do you want to talk a little bit about the lower level?
Sure. So one of the biggest problems that we're going to face with the City Hall, with staying at City Hall, I think, is parking. And part of that is because your development ordinance is very clear that the head-in parking right off the street that you've got right now isn't kosher any longer. And it's always difficult for a city to hold private developers to a different standard than it holds itself. So we're assuming at this point in time that a lot of that is going to go away. And so you're going to be faced with even less parking than you have right now. Certainly the, parking deck and some city lots aren't super far away, but getting certain staff members, maybe people with disabilities, maybe people who are in and out very frequently, fleet vehicles and stuff, to be able to park on site is going to be a priority. So one of the ways that we talked about doing that, and this is completely an option that may or may not happen, as you get into the design project, but there is a way to park in the lower level of City Hall, and that would require doing a little bit of ramping. So maybe from the west side, you ramp down to get down to basement level. So right off the street, you kind of ramp down and get to basement level. Whereas off of the east side, you could ramp up and have an elevated parking section above that's flush with the first floor, and then so you could essentially have kind of a mini parking deck on the south side of the building that allows you to kind of double your parking there, but also allows you to get access to this lower level and park some vehicles indoors, which could be nice. And there's definitely a cost to doing this. And during the design project, we would anticipate that there's be a lot of discussions about whether this is necessary or not, whether it's practical or not. But it's something that is certainly on the table and should be discussed as in terms of what what the cost versus benefits are. But essentially on this lower level, we're showing a bunch of parking spaces. There's also some mechanical type spaces on this level and some archive storage type spaces. And I'll finish off this level, I guess, Kelly, by saying that I think there's also a way to organize this so that you do not need to keep those two means of egress on the kind of the east and west side of the building, which are so problematic from an accessibility standpoint. You could kind of close those off and then and just egress within the building in a situation like this. And that's kind of what this shows. Again, it's this is not the final design, so there's pros and cons to doing things like that, but it definitely proof of concept that you can do something like that.
Thanks, Craig. I think one thing to point out in the diagram, you can see the perimeter of the building and is colored in red. All the interior walls that are colored the same way are considered historic. So those are walls that we can't necessarily move around. And I think that becomes more pertinent as we move up to some of the upper floors. So this is the first floor of the building, and you can see the historic fabric here is a little bit more limited. And I know you're all familiar with the current lobby space there. And I think when we're thinking about design of a city hall, one thing that is of primary importance is safety and security. And so when we program these spaces, we like to look at creating a public zone that's well defined where the public is accessing, then being able to create, we call it kind of a semi-secure zone where you could bring the public. And in this scenario, we've got meeting rooms that sort of flank between the public zone and the office space so that you're not necessarily having to bring people back into the workspace. So that's what this first floor plan does. It creates a nice open office area. There's multiple departments that we have plugged into this level, mainly departments that have more high levels of public traffic, community and economic development, codes, parks and rec, tax. There's some additional departments located on this floor, but they're definitely zoned in their own space. And then we've got service windows around the perimeter. As you move up to the second floor, you can see the historic walls are much more prevalent on the interior. So we're much more limited in how we can reconfigure the space. So we really have to maintain that existing corridor system, which it works for the spaces, but what it doesn't afford is that level of security. So people from the public can come up and just walk right into the mayor's office or, walk right into the clerk's office. And I think there's ways that we can help mitigate security there, but I think that's the primary difference between the main level and the second level. And, we define the city hall space needs as about 27,000 square feet. This building is about 52,000. So it's much larger than what you actually need for the city hall. So, and there's some inefficiencies with the corridors because of just the historic nature of it. The third floor is more of a partial plan, which you see here. And this we have just mapped out. The left-hand side is a mechanical attic, but the rest would be just tenant space. Or you could leave it and not finish it right away. So those are just some considerations for this variation. Craig, maybe you want to highlight the costing here and the pros and cons.
Sure. Well, I think in terms of the cost, I would like to save some of the discussion about cost to the end. We did cost estimates, and so you'll see those in association with each of these development scenarios that we're presenting. And if you guys have further questions to dig into it, I would say let's do that more towards the end. But let's get through each of the let's get through each of these development scenarios and then come back to cost when we have a comparison slide, because I think that has a lot. It's mostly about comparison. We can get into the detail if you like later, but I think the pros here are pretty clear. You can stay in the building that City Hall has occupied for more than 50 years. That's great. This, it's classic government architecture that, celebrates public service. And that sort of drama or significance is just not going to happen realistically with a new building or with any other renovation likely. And another great thing is you could immediately start this project to renovate City Hall because you don't have to find other land or acquire properties or anything like that. This is what you own already, and you could kind of just start the process tomorrow if you wanted to. The challenges might be this building is larger than is really necessary. And so you're going to, not to say that you don't have people who would want to move back into the building like you were hosting some local not-for-profits before, but it is significantly larger. And so there's maybe a little bit of a penalty in terms of you're paying to renovate something that maybe is a little bit less efficient because the corridors are so wide and some of the offices are bigger than they have to be because that's the size of the existing room, et cetera. Parking is a little bit of a challenge here, as I mentioned before. And then, as Kelly said, security of this offices on the second floor is a big challenge. It's going to require some strategies and some policies to make those things work effectively. But really, this is a strong candidate for a City Hall location, I think, in our minds.
The next development option we looked at was the
Chamber of Commerce building.
Thank you. I wanted to say finance in commerce, but that's this. The Chamber of Commerce building. And so what you're seeing on the screen right now, the lower plan is the first floor. And then you've got the second floor and the third floor. And if I'm sure you've all been in this building. I think, there's the very grand, very high ceiling space lobby. I think the challenge with this is it's kind of the one space in the building where we could accommodate a council chambers. And there's certainly some security and flow issues that I think we'd have to work through to integrate it into this space. But that is sort of the one location in this building where something like that could work. I think the way we laid this out, the floor plates are a little bit tighter than the historic City Hall, but we tried to take the same approach with security, creating a service counter at each level so that the public could come up and interact with the various departments. So the main level of the building, we've got community and economic development and codes. When you move up to the second floor, we've got finance, tax, and park and rec, which I think Park and Rec and Tax both get a lot of traffic as well. And then the third floor, we've got the mayor's office, HR and controller. And, you know, I think you can kind of see by these diagrams with this narrower floor plate, and with the program, you kind of have to ring the space with offices and then have an open office area in the center. The ceiling heights are a little bit over 8 feet. So it's not a huge volume, but I think we could make it work. There are some spaces that don't fit in here, like the community room. That was something we had programmed. So there are some spaces. There is a basement, which we didn't have access to those drawings. So I think that's another area that we could explore, integrating some of the support spaces into that one. Let you, Craig, you want to run through these?
Sure. I mean, I think it would be nice to keep, you know, if you're not going to keep City Hall in the existing City Hall building, then keeping it downtown and kind of that initial or kind of main core of the downtown would be great. So this is, you know, this very convenient to the county facilities. You know, I think that, you know, in this particular building, it's easier for us to maintain that rigorous level of security between where the staff works and where the public has access. Maybe a little bit less so for the council and where the council dais is, but you know, there's more discussions that need to be had about exactly how that gets arranged and whatnot. But that would be the only place where we would be really concerned, maybe that the security is a little is maybe a little bit suspect. You know, this building is pretty close in size to what the space needs technically are, although the basement level is a little bit of an unknown right now because we have limited, you know, we went down there and there's lots of level changes. There's a vault right in the middle, you know, a tremendous amount of piping and ductwork and stuff running through there. It's a little bit unclear how exactly we would use it. We're pretty confident we can use it for mechanical space, maybe some storage and stuff, but the community room is a big question mark. So while the building is kind of right sized, it's also not, you know, it's not perfect for, it might be just a little bit snug. The downsides would be, you know, there's really limited parking here. You know, maybe you could sign a couple of the parallel spaces along the street to be City Hall business only. You might be able to get control of a couple of parking spaces in the lot to the west. But my guess is you're not going to be able to get control over the entire lot to the west. You know, the offices, because just to get the offices and the workstations in that are necessary, everything's just a little bit smaller. In existing City Hall, the offices tended to get a little bit bigger to fill the volume that was left over from the historic walls, right? But here, to fit things in, the offices are going to have to be just a little bit smaller than we think is the correct size for some of these staff positions and some of these roles. And, you know, the workstation is going to be maybe a little bit smaller. The ceiling height is going to be a little bit lower. So you know, we're concerned that it would ultimately feel a little bit cramped to staff. You know, I think there's a downside to spreading your staff over 3 floors rather than just spreading your staff over 2 floors. That's a lot more up and down that staff has to make just to do their jobs and interact with members of other departments you know, for instance, the break room is only on 1 level on the 3rd floor because that's where it really makes the most sense. And so people who are on the 1st floor, you know, are going to be faced with going all the way up to the 3rd floor to access the break room. And that's, you know, maybe you can get a little bit of coffee counter, but that's just a little bit awkward. So
Craig, why don't you walk through the new development site then?
Yeah. So we were notified that there was a potential parcel of land available east of downtown, and it would be kind of a combination of 2 city blocks. It's controlled by 1 developer, and so we took that opportunity to explore that parcel to house the police department or to house City Hall or both. And that's not to say that this is the only parcel available for this, but but we did explore, what City Hall might be able to, how City Hall might be able to fit on that site. And I think it's relatively well sized to fit a City Hall. This would represent a single story City Hall building. So no worries about staff on all three levels, certainly. There's plenty of space for public parking. There's plenty of separate space for staff parking, so you can get a little bit of separation. That can be nice when you have a contentious council meeting, I suppose, and let the staff kind of exit through a different door than maybe the general public does. It could easily support a two-story City Hall as well, because it would take up less square footage. Just, going 2 stories tends to be just a little bit more expensive. But there's, it's plenty large enough to fit a City Hall. So this is a valid approach. It's a way to maybe inject a little bit of economic revitalization into a part of the community that's still could use something like that. When you build new, you're not really worried about cramping. You're making your offices a little bit too small, or having things that are a little bit disorganized, where offices that interact on a regular basis aren't on the same level or aren't close to each other. It's really easy for your architect to design around all that stuff and really get an ideal layout for the interior, convenient parking for staff and the general public. And certainly the maintenance costs of a new facility are going to be a little bit less than an older facility. But downsides, this particular site is not in the heart of downtown. And if you were to look for similar sized parcels, I don't think you'd find one in the heart of downtown. So moving City Hall a little bit farther out is maybe not where you want it to be, kind of from a traditional City Hall presence sense. And then of course, maybe a con would be you have to sell the existing City Hall to a developer, which is admittedly a tough pill to swallow.
Okay, we're going to move to the different development options for the police department. Paul, do you want to walk through these?
Sure thing.
Okay.
So this was a pulling my stuff up here. So we're looking at a site north of downtown. It's at where Little League Boulevard and Market come together. And this was a little over an acre lot, and it's currently zoned in a good position. Not a problem to put a police station on this parcel. It does require abandoning a portion of roadway. It could impact some adjacent businesses. From a coverage standpoint, not a big problem. The lot size is a little smaller than ideal. Really, it's forcing all the staff parking below grade, including below public parking. Really, you'd have to have a garage underneath the building that extends out underneath the parking lot. Everything is, some of the things like vehicle sally port for bringing in detainees and maneuvering is going to be a little difficult on this site. The public parking stalls that are available are a little limited. One of the things that is a concern in public buildings like a police station is having adequate standoff distance. 50 feet is ideal. And we're really nearly a zero lot line development on this particular parcel. I'd mentioned before, if you can have a site of adequate size to allow for some room for future expansion to happen, 30, 40, 50 years down the road, that would be ideal. And there's really no room for expansion on this site. So it's a 2-story full basement, parking all underground for the staff and fleet, and then the limited public parking. And really with the roadways and the traffic in this area, there could be some potential to park elsewhere, but it's going to be a walk and it's going to be crossing busy roadways. So it's that was the first one we had looked at. The second one we had looked at was on the same site that Craig just talked about on the eastern side, east of downtown, and I'm sorry, I'm flipping pages on my side so I can see it a little better on my end. So no problem. This would be a great parcel for a police station as well. You've got a little bit of standoff distance between the roadways, but not quite to the recommended levels. Again, fewer public parking stalls than what would be required. Which is really driven, those public parking spaces are really driven by the training and community room type spaces where you would need to have folks, folks from outside the department coming as visitors. It could either be a community type functions, or it could be training, regional training events that could happen here at this facility. Again, requires abandoning a portion of roadway. This really does give you an ideal way to stack or to arrange the building between majority of the occupiable and sort of the day-to-day business operations of the police department would be on one level, with the basement for some of the more storage, and again the sort of the fleet parking, if that was something that ultimately remained in the project. So fairly favorable development option for a new police station on this site as well. And then the last one that we had looked at for the police department was looking at going out to the current patrol site. And it's able to do a mostly single story building with a little bit of second floor space. The existing facility could be remodeled for public areas such as training space, lobbies, etc. This would require some rezoning, and that's not insurmountable, but it's a little bit more to the process, and sometimes can extend schedules just a tad. The building is really should only be about 50% of the site, and we're a bit over there, so there would have to be some administrative maneuvering there to allow that to happen. Public parking, there's not enough room for public parking to fit on the site. You'd need to share the Tabor Center parking across the roadway, and it does also doesn't allow for the recommended standoff distances. So similarly here, no room for growth or expansion beyond the limits of the site without either acquisition or maybe taking up parking and putting parking somewhere else, which is not ideal. So these were the three sites we had looked at. The good things, I mean, you control this parcel already, so which is a benefit. And Craig, I don't know if you wanted to start on the looking at the combined one, or if we want to pause here and talk about cost, or we're going to come back to cost.
We'll come back to cost. That's the cost is right after this one. So the possibility exists to do a combined police and city hall project in a new building, and you'd save probably around 5,000 square feet worth of total area if you do that by combining some stairs and mechanical electrical systems and the rooms that are associated with that, and some lobby space and community training space and things like that. So I think there's a value to the city in doing that. And the challenge is finding a way to do that in a within the constraints of the existing city, where there's not that many large parcels where you could just sprawl out in like a more suburban development. So the this parcel in the east of downtown probably works pretty well for that. If you find a parcel this one would be great, or something that's of similar size and configuration, you could work with. But basically you'd have, and this diagram shows, city hall's on the south and police is on the north. That might not be exactly right. Police is probably going to occupy the entire basement and maybe most of the first floor, and then maybe more city hall functions go upstairs, or maybe city hall sprawls a little bit on the first floor and more police stuff goes upstairs. But the idea would be that it would, there's some shared spaces that occur at the border between these two uses, and then there's a lot of spaces that aren't shared, and they can stack one over the top of each other, or they can go side by side like this kind of indicates. I think that there's not quite as much parking on this site as you might want to have. We're not, in this case, we're kind of lumping together all of the police public parking and the city hall public parking and the city hall staff parking kind of all into this one parking lot on the west side of the building. And that would be sufficient, because there's relatively few times over the course of the year when all of those parking demands will be met at the same time. So my guess is that they're, somewhere around 3 or 4 times a year, you just won't be able to find a parking space in this lot, and you have to spill out onto surface streets and find street parking. So that might be something that's perfectly fine. We're still able to get secure parking for the police personal vehicles on the rear of the site. We don't have to bury those like in that first police scheme. And so this works out relatively well, with the exception that, potentially, you're not going to get the ideal balance of, all of the basic functionality of the police department on the first floor. So from a day-to-day basis, most of their time is spent there, and have the first floor also function as, where the general public comes to City Hall and talks to community development and codes and tax and Parks and Rec and stuff like that. That won't all fit on one level. So there's going to be some decisions that need to be made about what goes upstairs, what stays on the first floor, and how that ultimately works. It might not be a perfect solution there. But again, it works relatively well in terms of the overall parcel size. And I think we can overcome a lot of those challenges through design and in discussions with the city.
Yeah, and I would just tag on at the end here with any of these, the other 3 scenarios that included, or standalone police, or this one. If we looked at any of these site plans, you can see that we're really tight when it comes from a building to parking to property line standpoint. The program, it does, assume that there would be, between 30 and 36 parking stalls enclosed, which is the operational fleet for the police department. And in the case of not constructing that as enclosed space, we would have to find room for those 30 to 36 fleet vehicles at grade. And in order to keep the staff personal vehicles, which is we figure at a peak midday shift change where we got 2 shifts of patrol plus all the civilians in the building, and the fleet vehicles that would need to be at the station during a shift change. We just can't accommodate all of that on at least these example parcels without putting some of that that surface parking demand of being the fleet vehicles enclosed. So it would need a little bit more acreage in order to accommodate everything on grade.
Yeah. So what we're looking at here is sort of a quick chart to show the relative to basically the costs of combined police and city hall project. Now that you guys all know that this study started off as being just an exploration of City Hall and the options associated with that. But as we got into the programming process with police administration, it became clear that the police department needed to be looked at on a more holistic level, which is why we brought Paul in to kind of look at things and tackle that issue. And it's caused some more broad thinking about how this might all come together. But there's, what we've presented to you in terms of these development scenarios is not all inclusive. There's plenty of other, parcels that could be explored for City Hall or for police. But basically what we're trying to do with this chart is compare, kind of the relative costs of doing one project for police and one project for City Hall. So you have an idea of what that total would be. If we selected the cheapest the least expensive city hall option to renovate the Chamber of Commerce building, and we selected the least expensive police building, which would be to kind of go out where the police patrol is located right now. You can see that those come together to form a $66.3 million project, whereas doing a new city hall and a new police station is expected to be maybe $64.1 million. And that's just due to the savings at 5,000 square feet you might save by combining those two programs together and not duplicating some of those spaces. Now we should talk in more general terms about these numbers. We based our cost estimating on similar projects that have occurred in central Pennsylvania over the past few years, and rectified the numbers to all be kind of equivalent to 2024 dollars. But there's still tremendous numbers of decisions that need to be made about the level of quality, the type of construction cost, whether this is a union labor project or not. The exterior materials, the level of quality, the speed of the schedule, et cetera. And so we can use these numbers for apples to apples comparisons, as we discussed today, but that's, and we have a pretty good idea that, that these numbers aren't super far off from where they'll end up being, but they could definitely fluctuate up or down depending on the decisions that get made during the design process, depending on when these projects occur, whether they occur tomorrow or they occur in 10 years. So I just want to, I want to put a caveat on these numbers, relatively safe for these initial planning phases and stuff like that. But it's too early to guarantee you that these numbers are exact, right? But again, this, this chart, you can kind of see the summary. It's to renovate City Hall is a more expensive project than the other City Hall options that we looked at. And that's for a couple of reasons. First off, this includes the more expensive, let's build parking in the basement, and let's build out the third floor, even though we're not really occupying that with City Hall spaces per se. But it also, reflects that project does, is a larger building, and it does take a few extras from the historic preservation side to refurbish the windows and so on and so forth. Ultimately, like I said, these numbers can go up and down based on the design decisions, but we can probably pretty confidently say that it's a few $1 million extra to stay in that City Hall building compared to the other City Hall options. And ultimately, it's the council's decision about whether that extra few $1 million is worth it to the community, due to the other subjective factors that are also very important to consider. Any questions on kind of the costs before we go into a couple of other final recommendations and discussion items?
What do you have projected as a cost for the underground parking?
I am not seeing it from my notes, but I think it's.
I'm talking about the staying in the current City Hall building.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't have my notes in front of me, but I think that was somewhere around $1 million.
I think you're right.
I was
Yeah,
gonna say,
and there's different levels we can do with that too.
You have in the report.
Yeah, that number is in the report.
Okay. All right. Any other? It is the site. Yeah, so that's like one.
That's listed at 1.8.
Pardon me, is that more than just the parking, or could we get a breakout on that? I guess is maybe.
That number includes, essentially building a little bit of elevated parking deck, kind of behind the building for, maybe a dozen and a half parking stalls, as well as ramping down and building out the interior of the doing the modifications necessary to build out the interior as parking spaces. So that that 1 million or whatever is really just limited to that portion of it, if that makes sense.
Anybody have I have a couple. Mr. Mackey, go ahead.
Well, Councilman Biter, are you suggesting that we could do away with the underground parking? Is that kind of what you're getting at? Because it sounds to me like the underground parking is the only way we can assure that we have ADA accessible parking spots. Because I would like somebody to show me currently where we could put legitimate ADA compliant parking spots without excavating.
I'm not suggesting
Right. I'm just
nixing it or not.
right.
I was just curious what the cost was on that. And
Right.
I'll be frank, I thought it was going to be a lot more than $1 million.
Okay. I was just curious.
Yeah.
Because and maybe I misunderstood that portion of the presentation, but it sounded to me like the workarounds to the parking issue, especially the ADA spots, was to go
The
underground.
underground.
Right.
Yep.
Because I would like somebody to show me currently. Well, we all know the answer. There's nowhere to put an ADA spot currently. So, and while we're on, and again, I don't want to get off too far off subject, but I am curious. And again, anybody from BKV can answer this. The ADA site compliance study that was done in 2021 by East Lake Dairy and Associates, how much of that report was taken into consideration when formulating the City Hall option?
Yeah, I went through that report with the fine tooth comb several times, because I think it was well done and it was thorough, and it was useful to us in our we did a review also, but that report was definitely useful. The majority of the issues that were identified in that report are essentially would go away in the case of a large scale remodeling like what you guys are contemplating. And so as if for instance, the bathrooms throughout the facility are an absolute disaster from an accessibility standpoint, right? There's almost nothing about them that meets the federal guidelines or state guidelines for that matter currently, but those bathrooms are all going to need to go away and get redone through the course of a remodeling project. So so that section of the accessibility report is we don't have to worry about any longer once we say that yes, we're going to embark on this remodeling project. So there's still things that are going to be impactful during this particular remodeling because of the historic issues that we're facing, and so those few things will need to still be addressed in the project, and so you don't want to lose track of that report and the recommendations it makes by any stretch of the imagination. But so much of it is resolved through the large scale remodeling that I think it's the amount of money you're going to spend on quote unquote accessibility related things is basically negligible over the overall course of the project.
So then would you agree or disagree with the executive summary part of that report that says City Hall would have to undergo a very large investment in remediation projects with marginal outcomes for better accessibility? Would you?
I would disagree
curious.
with that in the sense that report was based on let's stay in place. None of the departments are reorganizing. None of the, we're not. If you were to try to keep all of the all of the restrooms sort of in place and make incremental modifications, you would spend a fortune and get very little out of it, exactly like the report says. I just don't think that's the situation that you're in any longer. You can't effectively move back into that building with your current staff and pick up where you left off a couple of years ago. You're at this point in time, you're past that. And so the approach to making the building accessible is going to be different than what that report was contemplating. If that makes sense.
I mean, the report to me was contemplating a full remodel of City Hall, was it not? For us to be able to go back in there.
Our report is,
well, it detailed down to, measurements, what we needed to do exactly to be able to move back in to City Hall. There's a spreadsheet with measurements and all sorts of great information in it that states exactly what we need to do to get back into that building. So how is that different than what you're suggesting?
Well, it is that is, I suppose, let me take a step back. That is a strategy that the city could undertake to essentially move back in with as close to the current configuration as possible by following the recommendations in that earlier report. And, that's not the approach that we would recommend, because we don't think that the arrangement of the existing City Hall makes much sense anymore, especially if you're moving the police department out, right? The space needs that we discussed with staff during the course of our study, are pretty different than what the existing configuration of City Hall, provides, I guess. And the reality of moving back in and operating the mechanical, electrical, communications, plumbing systems, et cetera, after years of extremely limited use, maybe just some basic ongoing maintenance keeping, or that likely is not a recipe for success either. So, while we could, if you'd like, take a look at how to reoccupy City Hall without major renovation and what that would and what that would cost, and that would fall more in line with the recommendations from the accessibility report. I don't think that's in your best interests as a community.
And thank you for that. You were speaking again of the police department. At the beginning of this presentation, what was it, 77,000 square feet? That was the usage space. The three potential buildings you suggest are 57, 40, and 33,000 square feet, which are all well below 77,000 you say they need. So, I mean, it's reasonable to assume that the police department could operate out of a 33,000 square foot building, not 77.
My apologies for the diagrams. Those were trying to indicate what the footprint of the building is maybe on each level. It's our expectation that ultimately you'd get to 77, 80,000 square feet on each, and maybe more depending on, what is necessary to move indoors from a parking standpoint.
Okay, thanks for that clarification.
Yeah, my apologies.
Kind of on the police point. I mean, just one question that I have is, I mean, look, the information on the police footprint in general, for me, is enlightening. I mean, but at the same token, I really struggle to see how we would pull that off comprehensively financially, right? So in that vein, Paul, what are some of the things that you see? Are there trade-offs that you see municipalities make in terms of putting a police facility together, and what do they generally look like from your experience?
You know, there is aside from taking the fleet garage out of the discussion, you know, the moving from, I'm going to use round numbers here, moving say from 30 patrol officers to 40 patrol officers does not result in a lot of space. It is I mean, you're talking about a little more locker space and a little more space in briefing, maybe a slightly bigger break room or something along those lines. There's incremental changes from that regard. You know, cutting out 100 square foot or 150 square foot office here or there is not going to move the needle that far. You really have to look at reducing large amounts of space. So unfortunately, you know, something like a fleet garage, as beneficial as it is, sometimes the community has to make those decisions, but you also then have to have a site that allows you to park those vehicles outside, you know, and maybe you do covered parking and you know, make some provisions in that regard. There's still a cost for that as well. So you're buying more land, you're potentially doing covered parking outside. But that is a strategy. You know, we're working with a city in Ohio right now that's the direction they're going to go. You know, firearms training proficiency ranges is another thing that, unfortunately, as beneficial as they are, sometimes those can either be phased in later, maybe as an addition or as a separate project. It doesn't mean the need is not there. It just means that the finances might not support that. So it's the larger spaces that you look at that will help move the needle the most. You need to have a training room. You know, the training room serves crucial uh, opportunities to keep your department well trained and prepared for their work. But it also frequently serves as a community room, a place to break down those barriers between police and the public, where you can have sort of communal space that is sort of in between the police and the public. You know, there are certainly rooms that I think are absolutely beneficial that should not be considered. But every single project you have to have those conversations and you know, here's the identified need, but what is the budget? You know, what is the budget that we need to think about? You know, where can we become more efficient? Where can we look at using, you know, doubling up or being more multi-purpose in our spaces? These are conversations we have all the time, and it's just it's the next iteration in the conversation before design would occur. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and thank you for that very much. Any other questions before Craig and BKV kind of wrap up their portion of the presentation? Ms. Mealy.
So just to be clear, my reading of current police department space needs, including parking, as well as city hall needs, puts us at about 87,000 square feet. Does that 87,000 include parking for city hall? It does not.
No, there's the needs for the indoor parking that was being considered, at least from a programming standpoint, was only, if you look at the 20-year plan, it was only 36 patrol vehicles. You know, total, well, it's patrol and special vehicles, and it was the fleet, if you will, the operational fleet. There was still outside parking. Yeah.
But so I guess what I'm looking at, just to kind of follow up, is the oh, pardon me, I didn't look at the exterior. Anyway, the fact that our current city hall is about 100,000 square feet, according to your summary, correct? No, not 100,000. Jesus,
52.
52. That's why I was being.
I was like, what?
I know.
Where'd that come
Like, that's the wrong number. Hang on, that doesn't sound right after all. Yeah. But I'm just kind of looking, we've got 59, taking out the parking garage takes us down to 44. We're still a little short, but trying to figure out alternative space scenarios, or conversely, I know you make a wise and I think All right. You make a good and I think also wise for us recommendation that the city not take into account any level of potential grant funding that we might be able to bring to bear on an investment in reconstructing or constructing anything. That said, maybe I am particularly, but I think all of us are struggling with especially the cost of a new police structure. And if you can't tell from all the lines of questioning. And so in attempting to wrap my head around it, when you are working with other municipalities doing this sort of work, how are they funding a structure like that? Is there money out there? I know that everything is completely in flux right now federally. And I know that nothing you tell me about projects you've done within the last 5 to 10 years might reflect the funding scenario going forward with the federal government. So I'm sorry to ask this, and I won't hold you to it, but when we're talking about investing this kind of money in a facility for law enforcement in the city, how has it worked for other municipalities? How are they making that function as a part of their day-to-day financial decisions?
I'd say there's two, speaking about the sort of the federal opportunities out there, there's two, and I think one definitely does not apply to you, and it would be the US, the USDA does have some population caps that you would need to look at, but USDA loans, we've got several departments that are looking at grants and loans with from the USDA standpoint. It does come with a little bit of requirements as far as procurement and paperwork and some of those sorts of things, but it can work, but I don't know that those would apply necessarily. We've got one client we're talking to right now that is looking at FEMA dollars, but it requires them creating a community storm shelter that is part of that, and they in that case they're looking at having a firing range that could double as a community shelter, which would offset some of their cost to build something that they already know that they need. But it's not those are not part and parcel solutions to the overall funding issue. Sometimes it's had sales tax be a driver on police projects, especially when you have a lot of outside dollars coming into a community, as Williamsport does frequently. If you can pass a sales tax that when you can demonstrate what the source of funding is going to be generated from dollars that aren't even residents of the city. Sometimes that can be a compelling story to tell. Otherwise it's property taxes, which that does affect, the residents of the city directly. Frequently we like to start having those conversations when things have settled down on the program and we get to a point where we feel the budget and the program are more in alignment with the city's fiscal objectives. Then we can start having a conversation with the city's financial planner. We'd love to be part of those conversations and start talking about, well, what is the impact? What is the strategy? And what is the impact on the individual homeowner might be, or what might that sales tax revenue look like, and really sort of explore those issues and then start talking about how do you tell the story, the average $100,000 homeowner, or per $100,000 of home valuation, what does that really look like? Is it $20 a year, $30 a year, $40 a year? How do you break that down over the course of a 20 or more year levy increase? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it begins to. I guess what you're saying is there are no communities that are receiving $40 million in grant funding to build new police structures.
I can say that definitively.
No, that's it. We have seen some direct federal earmarks, coming back into play more recently. For for a long while, the idea of getting direct earmarks from the federal government was just, that just didn't happen. But those are coming back a little bit. And so, it's not off the table that a portion of your project could be funded in that manner. It's just at this point in time, it's so completely uncertain that I don't think that you can effectively plan on that, or that you should plan on that, and kind of assume that it's going to happen.
Yeah, no, of course. I think we all know that at this point there isn't a whole lot of planning that can happen when it takes into account what's going on federally. So we'll have to wait for some of that to settle out, I think. But frankly, on a project of this magnitude, we're looking at some waiting one way or the other, I suspect. Over and above that, I wanted to thank you for the report, which in some ways I am still digesting. Obviously, in other ways, it's already been exceptionally helpful in sort of visualizing where we're at, where we could be at, and I think in some ways in visualizing the overall cost of government moving forward here within the city. If I might very quickly, I wanted to highlight 2 paragraphs within your draft report. I don't know if they'll make it to the final. I would presume at this point they likely would, but within the executive summary, a functional review of City Hall staff. This is in part because I believe that everyone has access to the draft report at this point. Not that it isn't out there, but just that it isn't perhaps widely available. A functional review of City Hall staff was not within the scope of this study because staff are distributed over several small suites downtown and at Public Works. The decision to move out of City Hall was the correct decision, but we would be remiss if we did not comment that the current scattered arrangement of City Hall functionality is noticeably dysfunctional. The staff, understandably and through no fault of their own, has lost connection with the workings of government outside of their particular silo. This is harmful to staff morale and over time will significantly impact the functionality and efficiency of government. The institutional knowledge and connections that develop within a truly functional city government facility take time to build, but are critical to providing support to citizens in need. Those intangibles will continue to erode until staff is back under one roof. And if there are key resignations or retirements in the interim, the city will feel the impacts for a significant period of time. A review of the current police station facilities was not within the scope of the study, but the existing split across 4 buildings is of immediate concern due to the operational inefficiencies, the lack of administrative oversight of the patrol division, the challenges of maintaining evidence chain of custody, the morale damage from inappropriate facilities for patrol staff, and the concerns about protecting the health and safety of the officers. A new police station should be an important priority for the city of Williamsport. I guess that stuck out to me particularly because I have felt for the last several years while we've been debating about what to do, as though we were losing ground in a number of ways within city government. And however we digest this report over the course of perhaps the next couple of months, I think it's important for us to take away from this that we need to do something, that we can't wait for another 4 or 5 years to figure out what our next steps are. And whether, well, why don't you continue, because I'm assuming next steps is the next talking point in the presentation.
Craig's going to run through just the final thoughts and conclusions here.
Well, it's a fantastic segue, because the first thing we are saying basically is that we wanted to reiterate that something really does need to happen for the police department. That wasn't, something that we were really expecting when we were coming into the study, but as we toured the facilities, and you can easily get to see that the spaces are inadequate, and I think long story short, there's a little bit of urgency on the police side as well as the city hall side. And that's not trying to force council's hand. There's obviously some huge financial realities that you guys are going to have to grapple with, but because the police department was not on, we felt like it was worth saying, in addition to city hall, something needs to be done with police. We think it's important to state, and we're saying the things on this slide without bias for or against any of these decisions. These are just a few things that we think are probably important to put out there in the public realm to make sure that everybody's on the same page. All right. The city hall is worth apparently about $500,000 to an investor. But you guys should know that it would cost maybe $60 or $70 million to build that building today. So, by some ways of thinking, the building is worth $60 or $70 million. Some people would see that as a millstone around the neck, of the ongoing maintenance and of a facility that's larger than what you technically need. And some people would say that this is a financial asset to the city that, could never be touched. And the reality is probably a little bit of both. But they don't build them like that anymore. And so it's, you guys should be keeping that $60 to $70 million number in your mind. The next point is the building is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. And very little is going to be done to it to destroy it in all likelihood. And there's a little bit more explanation to this paragraph that is necessary. Our assumption at this point in time is that regardless of whether it's the city or a private developer who owns and controls the building, it's going to stay effectively the same in its configuration and its historic elements, because from the city standpoint, there's historic preservation value in keeping that. From a private developer standpoint, technically, the private developer would be allowed to demolish the building. There's no law that prevents that from happening, but you don't go in to purchase that building without a plan for redeveloping the existing property, because the land value is just not, the land value in Williamsport is not worth the cost of purchasing it and demolishing it. And effectively, if you were to make huge changes to the historic elements of the building, the private developer would be foregoing maybe up to 45% tax credits on the cost of that work. And that is such a huge financial incentive to leave those historic elements in place that what you see in reality with buildings on the National Register is that the developers come in and really would like to maintain those historic elements, take advantage of those massive tax breaks that they get to develop their project, and then make a lot of money off the deal. So we don't think that there is a tremendous risk to the building from selling it to a private developer. It's important to state that there is really truly historic preservation value, and this is something that as architects we spend a lot of time thinking about and discussing. There is historic preservation value to leaving this building to operate as a quasi-public government building, just like how it was built, mixture of offices and community gathering spaces, whether they're courthouses or city council chambers, and service counters. The building is operating and will potentially operate just as it did when it was first built, and that's fantastic from a historic preservation standpoint. And ultimately, to reiterate again, we already said this, but the city needs to decide at some point whether the subjective benefits of keeping City Hall outweigh the financial benefits of selling it. And that's a tough decision, especially when you're considering the financial impact that the police department is going to have on this whole thing. But that's ultimately, that's not a position that or a decision that BKV Group is taking any sort of opinion on one way or the other. We've tried to present the pros and cons of a few different development scenarios to you to provide you with sort of objective data. And so the city council can make the difficult decision ahead of you. The next slide goes over just a few next steps, and I think these are relatively straightforward. And we recommend publicizing this, getting probably the final report out to the general public and letting them read it and digest it and ask questions and so forth. Obviously a hugely important next step is to try to figure out what the financial capacity is to do these things, but there needs to be some groundwork. Looking for additional funding sources, talking to state and local government officials. The USDA loan thing that Paul mentioned, I think is, the information on the website was contradictory, so we can't say for sure one way or the other. Public-private partnerships might be a reasonable solution to developing City Hall, or potentially the police station as well, because it can open up slightly different financial streams to you guys. But if you did a ground lease essentially of City Hall to a private developer who's willing to lease it back to you, they might be able to take advantage of some of those 45% tax credits, whereas you guys could not because you don't pay taxes. Ultimately, estimating, as Paul mentioned, the impact to taxpayers of any sort of bond funding, I think, is a critical step. The numbers look enormous, and they always do when you evaluate on a homeowner by homeowner basis. The impact over 20 years is going to be much more nominal. It's not to say that there's not an impact. And depending on which level of project you embark on, the project, that level of impact is going to be bigger or smaller. But we urge you to kind of investigate that and publicize that as well, because my first instinct, as well as everybody else's, is to say this is ridiculous. Nobody could afford this. And the reality that we frequently find is that the impact is not as big as all that. You guys already talked about a certain amount of urgency in the schedule. We'd recommend creating some goals for when you're going to make decisions about this sort of thing, and try to work with the funding streams. Ultimately, you're going to have to hold some more discussion and a vote about what to do with City Hall. And ultimately, you're going to need to do the same thing with police department. But before you do that for the police, we recommend exploring additional site options. And if there's an indication at all that you might be thinking to relocate and build a new City Hall, we'd recommend exploring additional site options on that front as well. And because of the functionality of both of these building types is so critical, if you have tight parcels, you're going to want to do a little bit more study work before you make a final decision, so that you make sure that you can get a truly functional facility on the parcel that you're considering. We've been involved in plenty of projects where the community has purchased a parcel that's not big enough, and they've ended up needing to make some really difficult decisions about whether to get a new parcel or whether to cut out some important parts of their program in order to make it all fit. So we would recommend doing a little bit more study work before final purchase in a situation like that. And ultimately, I always say this because frequently it's an overlooked thing. This is a small line item compared to the rest of the ones we were talking about, but whenever you're talking about purchasing property, make sure you do your basic site due diligence stuff first. So you negotiate an out if the soils come back terrible, or if there's a bunch of environmental contamination on the property or something like that. That's not something you want to accidentally walk into and be responsible for paying for. So make sure you're getting your environmental assessments, your geotechnical reports, and your surveys and title reports on everything that you're looking to purchase. So that concludes the slides portion of our presentation, and of course, happy to answer additional questions that you guys have.
Craig, Kelly, Paul, team, thanks for the presentation, and thanks for taking some of our questions throughout it. It was at least helpful for me while it's fresh in my mind, and I know the point and piece that I want to get across. So are there any additional questions, thoughts, comments from members? And that includes the administration as well. You're a part of this process as well. So
I mean, could we talk about next steps? So this is the draft report. What comes next? Well, obviously the final report. What kind of work is happening between this report and the final report? And are there things that we like? For instance, I would be curious. Could you provide a list of everybody that you actually spoke to to come to these conclusions within the city? Is that possible?
Yes.
Yeah, we'll
I
put
think-
that in the final report. That's the exact sort of thing that we're looking for some council feedback on. If there's missing pieces of the report, that we want to rectify those missing pieces for the final.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, look, we haven't heard any public comment yet. I was kind of planning on maybe throwing this thought out there after public comment, but I mean, on the surface, when I see, these numbers and, the detail that went into this, I mean, realistically, the floor of this is like 28 million dollars. The ceiling's in like the low 60s, right? And realistically, I mean, in my mind, with that being said, I mean, I don't without digesting this, I don't see the Pine Street, the chamber building as an option. Like, I just don't know how that works, right? So that leaves new facility. Clearly, there are some benefits to combining, right, from an economies of scale perspective. I think there needs to be some thought and dialogue around what the police scope of that, and even like the city government scope of that looks like from a square footage perspective. But then the other option is frankly like still like City Hall, just because of the fact that if there's a way to find ADA accessible parking, just because there's simply extra square footage there that could be utilized, and then knowing the piece of being able to do work at the site, the old museum as well. I mean, like those are just on the surface, the two real concrete options that we have. Both of them are going to be expensive, but those are the two realistic options we have in front of us that I think we need to understand, probably fine tooth, like what they kind of look like. And then we look at the financial piece of that. Either way, it's not going to be good, but that's in my mind kind of where my head's at as far as what taking this to a final report, understanding what those pieces look like in a final report. John, your feedback on who all was able to participate in compiling this, that kind of stuff from employees, like that's all very, very valuable to ensure we have, accurate representation, that kind of stuff, right? So like Craig, for feedback for you, like that's in my mind something that I think would be helpful in a final report.
Okay.
But, so. And that's obviously with a grain of salt because we haven't had public comment yet, but. Go ahead, Ms. Mealy.
No, I was just going to say that I think it probably would be a pertinent moment to move to public comment, especially for all these lovely people who've been here for so very long. And then that may in turn assist us in thinking of things, other things that we want to see in the report. So let's do that and then return to the subject.
I mean, again, I would just say, Liz, to your point earlier, when you read that, excerpt from the study, I don't think we all realize we have to do something, right? It's not like we've been sitting up here for the last 4 years thinking that everything was fine, right? So there is that. And again, Mayor, I think all things considered, right? Your administration did the best that you could do given the circumstances, right? This is the best we can do right now. Is it perfect? No, it's not even close to perfect. And we all know that, but the reality of the situation is this is where we are. So again, I want to thank you for figuring this out and doing the best that you could do to keep the city going, right? We talk about realistic. I mean, Liz, you're long time chair of the Public Finance Committee. Realistically speaking, and Mayor, maybe you can answer this question. What is the most amount of money you think somebody would loan the city of Williamsport in our current situation?
By the end of this year, I believe we're projecting having all of our city audits up to date. At that point, our debt ceiling is theoretically, I want to say, another 30 or 40 million. I'm trying to remember. We have a pretty high amount of debt that we could take on.
Okay.
And I
Right.
think if we have clean audits, we probably wouldn't have any difficulty reaching that ceiling. That
Right.
said, I don't want us to do that.
Well, that's what it's gonna take.
Right.
Right.
That's, yeah, but I'm just saying, like I actually don't, we could not out of the gate finance the totality of this construction. But I think we could probably finance a pretty substantial portion of it coming out of the gate. I'd have to look into it. And to be fair, my knowledge of our debt ceiling comes from a currently somewhat discredited member of the former administration. So we should, we should look into the amount of debt that we're allowed to carry as the city, but it's multiple times our annual budget. So I think we're currently sitting on around $20 million worth of debt, probably slightly less than that. We can take on a fair amount of debt, but we would need to think hard about that. And I think you're right that we would likely be unable to move on that until we get a clean 23 audit
Right.
put together.
And again, could we do it? Sure. Right. But again, I just,
Well, John, I think the overwhelming indicator we're getting from this report is that we will have to do something.
well,
And that
right, I
will
didn't need
cost us
somebody to
money.
tell me that. We
Right,
know
right.
we need to do
Well,
something, right?
my point is that it's not, we need to figure out a way to make it financially work for us.
I understand
as
that.
quickly as possible.
And we
that
also-
is
I-
likely
I-
to include taking on a bunch of debt.
Right. And I don't want to lose sight of the fact that, as Councilman Allison stated earlier, we are losing population,
Mhm.
that we are looking down the barrel of a $2 to $3 million budget deficit going into next year,
Mhm.
that we're looking down the barrel of a $1.4 million bill from the FTA,
Mhm. Thanks to the
thanks to the
discredited member of the former
discredited
administration.
right. And that the average mean income of a household in Williamsport is $44,000.
Mhm.
That 90% of the kids that go to our schools fall below the poverty line. I don't want that to go unrecognized, because
Right.
that's important.
Right.
And again, I'll say it again, that building is historic. Yes, it will still be historic regardless of what is happening on the inside of it. It will always be historic.
Mhm.
It's always going to be there.
Right.
Right? It was there for us for the last 50 years. It was there as a post office prior to that, when we were over in the original building, which is now beautiful luxury Airbnbs.
Mm.
And here we all sit. So again,
The only point if I can add
Yes,
to,
please.
I think to the original question, President Yoder, Vice President Biden, and myself had a conversation with DCED to the debt ceiling point. Likely on next week's agenda, we'll have the financial strategic plan. And if we move forward with that, that's definitely a conversation clearly that we'll be able to have with them and include in that updated study. So we'll get a more definitive number there, and to Councilwoman Mealy's point of the audits, being caught up, that clearly will help our standing. So I think that all those questions should be able to be answered in a, fairly quick amount of time as we move forward here. It's kind of aligning pretty nicely, all things considered, with what's going on with the financial strategic plan 2.0, this study, and then the decisions that we collectively have to make. So.
All right, let's go into public comment. So there's a number of members of the public here. I know normally for meetings, we do like a 3-minute thing. I recognize the complexity of the issue for residents. So I will absolutely, I want to balance efficiency with ensuring that people get their questions answered, comments out there, what have you. So I think we can work together in that vein. I didn't have anybody sign up, so I'll open the floor for public comment. I will ask anybody that wants to make a comment to come up to the podium, so that it'll be on the record, but then it's captured in the minutes for us, so that it will be captured in the record from that perspective. So, BKV is online and Kelly is here. Questions for us, whatever that may be, questions, comments, thoughts on what you found, something you see missing. Love to hear it. So.
Hi, I'm Lisa Fank.
Good evening.
Good evening. I want to thank you guys. I've been to some school board meetings and they love spending money, like millions and millions. And it's really nice that you're being fiscally responsible. But I just wanted to point out that, we started this about 3 years ago and we were talking about $5 to $8 million. And we were all like, oh, we don't have $5 to $8 million and we can't put that in the building. And geez, I wish we would have done that. But couple things that came up that I noticed. I also wrote down, Liz, that whole business that you wrote and about how we need to do something. And City Hall is the only building in the study that we currently own. Therefore, renovations could begin as soon as funds are procured. The other options add years to the process, especially the building. But as to building, this report opens saying anything built in 1891 is in good condition. Anything 134 years old is in good condition. Anything renovated in 1979, it said 71, but it was 79, 46 years ago, needs to be replaced. Okay. So that's how much construction materials degraded over the 100 years and the craftsmanship. So why would we build an entirely new building today when we know it would have to be replaced 40 to 50 years from now? That would be my biggest point there.
Thank you, Mrs. Fink. I appreciate that. Mr. Winkleman, welcome and good evening.
Thank you.
The floor is yours, sir.
Oh, boy. I just have a couple of questions. The City Hall's 52,000 square feet and we need about 27 for city government, right? Tonight.
That's what was in the report. That's
Yeah.
Yep.
So that means there's 25,000 square feet that could be utilized some other way if it's organized in a different fashion. And instead of taking the ground floor for parking, maybe that can be commercially used. And you move the City Hall upstairs a little bit, and that may impact cash flow and the value and cost of the project. So anyway, that was what I think could be looked at. Oh, I guess I have another question though. There's been talk about the ADA handicap parking spot. I'm from New York City. We don't worry about that. We don't have parking. What is the complexity of getting that for that building? Is the underground parking the reason? I mean, yeah.
Do you mind if I take that one, Kelly?
I was going to say, if you could talk about in relation to
there's probably a couple of different ways we can provide ADA parking to the building. The requirements are that that we have to provide kind of parking wherever the parking for the building is located. We have to provide the closest, most realistic parking stalls need to be accessible, and there's plenty of loopholes associated with that. My suspicion is that ultimately the solution is going to be, if you call the street to the east of the building an alley, you maybe still retain some head-in parking there that you could establish as accessible, make it flat, make a stable sidewalk surface between that and the ramp to the front of the building. Alternately, you can arrange a parallel parking space along the front of the building that you could call your accessible parking, and that works for the general public. For staff, if you have some dedicated staff parking, that would need separate accessible parking stalls. That's likely to occur behind the building where we encounter more challenges, frankly. And so that's either a significant regrading project to bring the level of that parking back there basically up to the level of the first floor or the ground floor. So you either dig down or you build up there, or you could potentially do a little bit of both. But the parking stalls need to be essentially flat, and there needs to be an accessible route between the parking spaces and the entrance to the building, which the accessible route consists of sidewalks that would be essentially flat, and ramps, which are not as steep as you might think that they could be. The existing ramp in the back of the building isn't that far off, but the configuration of the parking stall itself that is painted as accessible doesn't come anywhere close to the requirements. And that's ultimately where the biggest problem is, that the asphalt area is just way too steep. And so I think it's plausible to put accessible parking back there. You just have to spend a little bit of money to make it happen. Probably not it's not, I would not say that it's critical to do the parking inside the building to make the accessible parking happen. There's approaches we can do outside the building. The only reason why we indicated the indoor parking in the report, in the presentation, is that members of the committee and the council and stuff were curious about how that might even work. So we wanted to show that and demonstrate it. It's certainly not the only option for providing some parking and some accessible parking on the site. It's just the option for providing the most parking on the site.
Please. Floor is yours. Welcome. Good evening. And thanks for your and everybody else's patience in getting to the public comment. No, you're good.
I'm good to go?
Yep.
Okay. How you doing, council? My name is Nathan White. I'm a commercial realtor here in Williamsport, and one of the sites that's in the study is actually a listing that I'm working on. I just want to talk a little bit about it. So the one negative part about having the Charwell building is between two main entrances to our city. We have a 36,000 square foot vacant office building sitting there. It's got highway visibility. And then also currently where the existing city hall or the old one is, there's been a lot of development there with the cultural center, the Liberty Arena, the movies, the Bass development going the YWCA, the Jackass Brewery, community arts. If we had another residential apartment building there, it would drive more people to the area for the nightlife, entertainment, which kind of gets more people from the outer skirts to come into the town when there's actually, something going on in town. Another thing I wanted to bring up was the site across the street by Robert M. Sides. There's 45 more parking stalls there the city already owns for overflow. And right now we currently have two buildings that are vacant. The Charwell and City Hall. We could get both of those occupied, let the existing one go to a developer and build a new one, and demolish the Charwell building for a new City Hall. That's about it. I just want to bring up those points. So
thank you very much. Welcome, good evening, and the floor is yours.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
First, great job in getting the study done. I think that adds a lot of facts to a lot of confusion. So terrific. First, I have a few different comments. First, in the study, what was the population growth that they used to project out?
I don't know that they were projecting population growth. I think they were projecting potential growth of city government, like employee staffing, et cetera.
So why would the city government grow if the population doesn't grow?
I think to Mr. Allison's
Yeah.
point, I think that's partially what
Okay.
you were, I don't want to speak for you, Randy, but I think that's kind of what you were getting at.
I'm
So I
fine,
think,
yeah. Good, okay. I saw the layouts of potential new buildings for City Hall and for the police stations and whatever. And I am like Mark, I am from New York City, and I looked at that and I said, oh my God, urban sprawl. I love that I can walk everywhere in Williamsport. And when you start making these big stretched out one-story buildings with parking all around them, it just creates sprawl. And it's not very pedestrian friendly. It's not, that's what I love about these small towns, is that you can walk around and everything's right there. And that's City Hall today, where it's located, is a great location. It's accessible. And I don't mean that in an ADA sense. I just mean that for everybody, for the entire population. The other thing I wanted to say, these are random thoughts, so I apologize for that. The police and the training square footage, that was a huge number there. Does the county do training? Is there a way to share some of these spaces with other government entities? Share the cost, share the facility?
That would be most ideal if Lycoming County and a lot of other rural counties in Pennsylvania would start to regionalize those services.
Yes, so just random thought. Then the other thing I wanted to say, I love Williamsport for all its historic buildings. I love that City Hall is there. I hope that we preserve it. It's one of the things that makes Williamsport special. And I just did a really rudimentary calculation, but $25 million to renovate City Hall. It's going to last, I don't know, 50 years. This is what we're renovating for, 50 years. So that's $500,000 a year. We have 25,000 residents. It's $20 a year. Sign me up.
Ma'am, before you go, could you please introduce yourself for the record in the minutes? Kelly Spittler, thank you.
Good evening, sir. Welcome.
Hello. Sitting here and watching this and listening, I'm a 71-year-old man. I've lived in New York City most of my life. I'm back here in Williamsport for so many years. And I've seen Williamsport go from a town of 45,000 to fewer than 27,000 today. And when you look at the population growth, negative or positive, within 10 years, we're going to be fewer than 24,000, which means we will probably have a cut of staff, about 25%, I estimate. And when we first heard this about 3 years ago, to renovate our city hall would be about $5 to $7 million. Now I'm looking at all these figures here of 20 million plus 57 million and whatever the millions were there. I just don't understand where the money will come from. As we know now, probably for the next 4 years, for the next 8 years, because of our current administration in Washington, there's no monies that are going to be there. Even with FEMA, the monies are not going to be there anymore. I know grants go with either stipulation with certain grants. Grants can be 100%. Grants can be, we have to match it. And it's just the idea that where are we going to get the money from? Williamsport is a poor town. We're not a wealthy area. And even raising the taxes this year, I think it was $0.25 that hurts a lot of people in this town. When you raise taxes in this town, especially since we have more renters in this town than we do have private residents in this town, the landlords are going to have to raise the rents, which means the common person in this town, which works on a minimum wage, cannot afford to pay the rents. And that's going to hurt us. And for us, we should have never moved out of City Hall in the first place. During the last administration, we had monies. The monies were there. We all know what happened. things were mismanaged, they were squandered, everything happened. We all know what's going on now, with Bill Nichols and the last administration. But for us to move out of City Hall at that time 3 years ago was the biggest mistake because one person decided to move out of City Hall. A big, big mistake. Now, to go back, it's going to cost us a lot of money to go back, but the monies, if we research, we can find monies out there to start taking loans out, and with the interest rates today, how are we going to pay for this in this town? Now, I'm on the process now of just closing on another house in Williamsport, coming back to Williamsport. That's why I'm here. I sold my house in September of last year. By selling my house up in the Belmont area, I've saved $9,000 by moving to Loyalsock. And now I'm coming back to Williamsport, and I should be closing pretty soon. My taxes will be less than what I was paying in my former house, about $14,000 a year. But I love Williamsport. I came back from New York City to come back to this town. And I love our old City Hall, and the previous City Hall too. As a child, I used to go there. So I just feel that we have to put our thinking caps on to get back to City Hall, all of us to get back there and bring it back again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, Adam.
Yes.
Since we're going with this Thunderdome style of council meeting tonight,
It's fun, right?
Mad Max 2 reference. I just want to clear one thing up, and thank you for your comments. We moved out of City Hall 3 years ago because we had to, because it was not ADA compliant. We had no choice. We had to leave City Hall. It wasn't the decision of one person. It was the right decision by a group of people who realized that not every citizen in Williamsport could access City Hall. And that is why we left.
Mr. Huffman, the floor is yours.
Good evening, City Council members, Bruce Huffman. I wasn't going to mention this, but Mr. Mackey, since you brought that up, looking back through the records, I believe it was January, February 2020 that the council decided to move their meetings to this building. The rest of City Hall stayed in City Hall until it was the fall of 2021, after there were 2 leaks. After there was a single leak, one in the summer, I think it was July, that then the mayor said entirety of City Hall would move to various buildings temporarily. That's my understanding. I think maybe you're remembering things differently.
I don't think I'm remembering things differently. We've got a 17 pages of Excel spreadsheet that says
that report came after you.
Bruce is correct.
Okay.
Yeah,
and it's
Bruce
okay.
is right.
I mean,
And I'm not trying to.
potato.
Yeah,
we
I mean,
can't be in there.
I understand there are issues with accessibility,
and we couldn't make the administration leave.
But
we had the option
right.
to leave.
You as a city council decide to have your public meetings in this building because it was more ADA accessible. I get that. I don't.
It is ADA accessible.
I don't disagree.
Not is.
So I think the one point that wasn't brought up, I guess to Mr. Hoffman's point this evening, is that we are under the federal consent decree, ADA consent decree.
Yep.
So we are under that. I mean, that's a federal court
And
order.
that came later. Yeah.
Right. So we're beholden to that now though. So that was a piece of it, and that was a piece of it back then. And the lawsuit did come in 2020 when we had that. And then both sides that we're still working with right now under that federal ADA consent decree. So we can't ignore obviously the consent decree. So we're to all that, I'm saying that to say, wherever we are, of course, ADA plays a role. And City Hall, of course, was the basis of the lawsuit and the consent decree. So whichever route we ultimately decide to take, if it's in City Hall or not, but if it is in City Hall, then we still have to follow the consent decree. So I just did want to add that because I don't think that's really been brought up tonight about the consent decree.
And then I'll just add one more thing, that at the conclusion of the 9-month ad hoc City Hall study, the vote was to move back to City Hall. That was the vote.
Sure,
Prior
but
to
that,
everything else, but that was the
right,
vote.
before we
That
had
was
any
the vote.
information on the ADA. I mean, come
That
on.
that is correct. Bruce. And look, I'll speak to this because I was the chair of it. Okay. And I tried to really get a good group effort of exploring the issue with minimal resources that we had at our disposal, right? That is absolutely the case. That was the conclusion that the group came up with at the time. To Derek's point, or to the mayor's point, excuse me, prior to the leaking issue. Absolutely right. I'll also say this as the chair of that committee, our findings clearly were not accurate. Okay. It was what, $5, $6, $7 million, I think could be said to fix City Hall. I used to work in this industry, right? I feel confident in at least like the mechanical piece of this or what have you, and things have certainly changed in, almost 4 years, but clearly there is a knowledge gap between what we found at that time and this. And as somebody from industry, I will believe BKV, with all due respect to my colleagues and everybody that was involved in that process, over that, right? So, anyway, just to clear that up.
Yeah,
You are right,
and
Bruce.
honestly, I wasn't planning to say any of the stuff I just said. That just.
But nonetheless, like the timeline, record, reasoning for how all of these are nuggets as to why we're here. And this includes me. I hope the reasons we are here, in my opinion, are lessons that we can learn moving forward in whatever conclusion comes out of this. And I hope that we do, because while it's really nobody's fault up here, why we're here, clearly we have a lesson to learn as a city government, because this has happened twice. Okay. And I've had that exact reaction before where I chuckle, but but it's also sad. I mean, and to be frank with you, part of the concern I have in general, and I will give you full time here, Bruce. I apologize. You open up a very, I think, important point. I'm scared that in 30 years, 40 years, that I'm going to be out there. No, and this exact same cycle is repeating. I'm nervous about that a lot. And I don't know how to fix that. Right? That's a big piece we should really be thinking about, right? If we're going to put $25 to $35 million into a building, man, we got to figure that out, or else we're just going to be back here again. Right?
I agree.
Bruce, sorry. Thank you for the points.
Sure. No, I'd just like to say thanks for doing this study. Thank you to BKV for such a detailed and extensive overview. I wish that it had been done 3 years ago, prior to putting the building on the auction block, so to speak. But I'm glad it's done. There's a lot of good information there. I've only just been going through the report today, so it's 120 pages with the appendices. So it's a lot to absorb. I hope that once the final report is done, that there is an extensive effort to involve the public. As you know, I wanted to involve the public as part of the BKV study. I thought you should actually talk to us as well as citizens and users of the City Hall building, but that wasn't done. But I hope that, as BKV recommended, having open house, having online surveys, things like that, I hope that will be done. Other than the legal notice and the fact that it was listed on the previous city council agenda, there was zero publicity about this meeting. So I thank all the citizens who came out tonight on a snowy night to say what they wanted to say about this. Again, it's a lot to take in. I know it's not something that's going to be solved overnight or in a week or in a month. I did have one specific question, maybe BKV or somebody could answer. I think you gave a timeline in there as far as if new construction, the acquisition of property, the design, the building was like about 3 years that would take. Maybe I missed it, but was there anything in there about if you would go back to City Hall and do the entire renovation, from beginning to end, how long that timeline might be?
Craig, I don't know if we included anything in there, but with that renovation, I mean, don't quote me on this, but it's not going to be as long a period. It is extensive with all the infrastructure. 9 months, maybe.
Yeah, 9 months construction, maybe a little bit for design. We should put that in the report, though. We can do that.
Yeah, please do. That's a good nugget. And thank you for asking that, Bruce.
Sure.
That is in the study, if I can interject real quick.
Oh, good.
Design phase, city should plan on a 10-month design phase, bidding phase of 2 months, construction phase of 14 months.
Okay.
Estimated city hall renovation time of 26 months.
Was that for the existing?
Yes,
Not for new? Okay.
for existing.
What page?
Forgive me, I'm scanning through it.
Frankly, that sounds like a new construction timeline. I might not have edited it appropriately when writing the report.
Yeah, forgive me. Yeah, Bruce, I apologize. I think it pulled the wrong keyword.
No, that's okay. I thought maybe I missed it.
Because it says it provides an estimated timeline renovation of the current city hall. So I think it was that keyword current and it may have pulled the wrong timeline. I apologize for that.
So again, like I said, I hope there's going to be a lot more discussion. Obviously, the financial, I get that. We all get that whether it's 25 million or 57 million or 82 million, I get it. It's millions and millions of dollars that the city does not have access to right now. I do hope that as part of this discussion and further, deciding on what can be done, I would ask that the mayor direct the grant writer people to thoroughly look into grant options for any of the scenarios. Really any of the scenarios, because until some of those numbers, and I get like Ms. Mealy said that, who knows what could happen in the next several years, but I think it's really worth seriously, uncovering every possible, funding source for that. So thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Appreciate the questions. Any other questions, comments, discussion items from the public? I appreciate the dialogue very much so. Very much so. All right. So that takes us to item 3, discussion on next steps, final feedback to BKV. I mean, I'll open the floor to the group. So I think there were a couple pieces that we captured, whether it was through our dialogue during the presentation at the end there. John, you mentioned about names, for example, which I think is valuable. We talked about, the piece of a smaller footprint new, right? I think closing in on those as maybe our 2 realistic options. There was the nugget from Bruce outside of the scheduling, but it's in the minutes, so we can get them done and get back over. But I would ask BKV, are there other things you need from us to make this a final report? And conversely, members of council, other things, questions we want to see between now and final report incorporated? Whoever, Mr. Pelizzi.
No, I think what I personally would like to do is go through the different options, create a list of some of the proposed spatial needs, and submit them to BKV and try to get a correlating cost of those potential needs, you know, when we, as the gentleman earlier stated, you know, the idea of necessarily an indoor 25-yard long 8-lane shooting range may not be necessary. So, you know, the elimination of some of those kinds of things and fiscally the impact that they would have on the overall project costs, just as an example of some of the things I would like to get some clarity on.
Okay.
Yeah. Point. Yeah, I think we need to prioritize some of those things. Have it.
Yeah. It's real easy when somebody gives you a pen and a blank piece of paper and says, tell me what you want versus what do you need? Yeah. Or what can you afford for that matter? Yeah.
Yeah, it needs to be, we need to have some feedback from, a lot of feedback from the administration. Right.
Yeah.
No, thank you for clarifying that, Chief.
And look, if I can add, I mean, I to be candid, I assume that, right? But I still think the information's valuable. At a minimum, it's been extremely educational for me, right? That as I kind of referenced earlier, that really helps start to better understand. That's a good concrete applicable example of what that whole idea of like what the national standards look like, for example, right? And I hope a lot of that you know, just dialogue about that specific scope didn't come across as that, but that wasn't my goal. But nonetheless, excellent, and we look forward to, I think, finalizing maybe what those needs look like. So that's great. Any other feedback for BKV and BKV? Anything you need from us? Miss Mealy, you have your. Mr. Mackey, go ahead.
Sorry,
I don't. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Rock, paper, scissors.
You can go.
No, so my understanding is that we're looking at then, you know, an estimate for the police that partly reflects what forces receive when they're constructing new facilities elsewhere, which is fine and which is good. If BKV could maybe possibly provide something a little closer to a document that reflects what our police officers currently have spread out across 4 different locations in the city. That is to say what we would need to replicate the current services we're providing to our officers. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
But all in one location. It seems to me that might be useful, just to kind of understand where we're at versus the proposal that we've got in hand. I think that might be helpful. And, you know, maybe help us to wrap our heads around the idea of a smaller footprint for a structure for the police.
Okay. And with that, were you requesting some benchmarking then, just of similar police departments in comparison?
No. I mean, I think what we have from you is a bit of a comparison of sorts, what other departments tend to have, or a sort of an average of what departments tend to have nationally. I'm more curious about what we have with possibly the augmentation of what the officers think, you know. But partly what I don't understand, and this is in part me being out of touch with the needs of the police department. This is not I'm not saying that every member of council shares this lack of understanding, but I don't understand the full scope of our facilities in every area that we have them in town. And consequently, it's hard for me to picture what it looks like if we stack all of those up in one place. So I think it would be helpful to know sort of where we're at and what that looks like all put together versus where we could be and what that, looks like.
And that, I mean, that to your point, Liz, this is kind of what I was getting at when this whole presentation started. I mean, we're saying that we talked to the administration, we talked to the police, we talked to these people. The chief, we don't need an indoor, why were we presented with options of an indoor firing range? We clearly don't need that. So how much discussion was actually happening here? That's what I'm saying. Like, I want options that fit the city of Williamsport. I mean, show me a police department the size of ours in the state of Pennsylvania that operates out of 77,000 square feet. I'm going to say it doesn't exist. So, I mean,
Is that a request, John?
yeah, I would seriously show me a city of 30,000 people with 52 police officers that operates out of a 77,000 square foot building in Pennsylvania. Please show it to me.
And that's what I'm referencing with the benchmarking, to be able to compare.
But why wasn't that done to begin with? We're sitting up here with all of these recommendations, and clearly the police don't even want half this stuff. According to you, Chief, I mean, what are we doing here?
That's correct. Because a lot of the things that when we did these interviews, it came up and it was always, what's the national average? And this is with the projection, it's not what our needs are. So we've done that. And one of the things to do, I would invite everybody to come and look at how we are split up. That's one of the things I've done before. I'd like you to come see how we are working, how we are operating. It's abysmal.
I've been down to the,
yes,
I've been there.
But overall, with the overall, we're at 4 or 5 different sites right now and separated and just to see what it's like. So with what we're working with right now, we're not asking for hardly anything, just a building to be in. And with what the needs are, we have a breakdown within house of what we want and what I think we need. We understand what the financial situation of the city is right now.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't dare ask for, a police department this expensive with where we are at right now.
And
we're exploring options and we're exploring options with grants, tiered grants, what we can do. It's not an easy process, as you all know.
So they are going to, that's part of this, right? They're gonna take this, adjust for the final report, okay? That will be reflective of.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I'm not trying to be difficult. Shouldn't that have been done? I mean, right? This was supposed to be done in November. It's February and we're getting 77,000 square feet recommendations, indoor firing ranges. Do you get what I'm saying? And this is
John,
not, I'm not casting dispersion. I'm not.
Well, it sounds like you are, right?
Well,
and so look, John, I really appreciate exactly what you're saying. Okay. And I really don't have an answer for it. To me, individually, it's valuable. Clearly, a lot of that's not going to happen. That's part of what we're talking through. Okay. I think that BKV gets the point. I think our police department has re-articulated that as well. I think we can collaboratively work together to kind of refine what is going to be realistic.
Right.
And so I think that point's been made.
I think BKV has done a good job of presenting us every option. So so that they wouldn't miss anything. I think they were showing us a comprehensive set of circumstances right down the line. And then this is where we get to work and decide what fits for Williamsport. So, and they'll adjust to that and we'll get the numbers that we need. So,
correct.
I'm happy we got something concrete finally and a lot of comparison value in it. And it's getting us off first base, and we gotta get home. But there's no two ways about it. So that's how I look at it.
Yeah.
I don't think it's wasted time
Mm.
or effort. I think it's information.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Ms. Mealy, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I guess the last point that I would make about this, hopefully my last point, is that I do actually think that it's important for us to understand not exactly pie in the sky visions, but what is happening elsewhere. Because here's the thing, like, as we've discovered, we aren't going to touch any of this crap again for the next 20 to 50 years until something breaks, right? Unfortunately, it would be great if we were budgeting for replacement. It would be great. But my point is, much as Craig was saying earlier about City Hall, we are out of City Hall. There is no point in doing anything other than a gut and a rebuild if we're going back in, right? And by the same token, if we are constructing a separate public safety structure, there is no reason to get elaborate with things that we can't afford and that we won't need. There is also no reason to build ourselves a crappy public safety structure and have to live with it for the next 50 years. So we need to find some sort of a happy medium. And I think that comes from understanding where other municipalities have gone and then understanding what we can do. But we can't do it without understanding both of those things.
Yeah.
And now it's 9:37, and I'd say,
Mr. Pelisi, you have a
No, I just, to what Liz had mentioned just now about the idea that we're not going to look at examining this again for another 30 to 50 years. And to kind of brought me back to Adam, your statement earlier in the meeting that, I share your sentiments. I'm scared too. About how the decisions that we make now are going to impact our children in the future of the city. So yeah, it's an awful lot to think about.
Yeah. Any other, I guess, comments, thoughts, making this final to BKV from the group? I think they have a handful of final
Marching
things,
orders, yep.
actions. Excellent. I'll leave us with this, I guess, like rough timeline based on kind of the dialogue feedback we gave you, rough timeline from here to having this finalized. What does the team expect that to look like?
I don't want to speak for everybody, but I mean, I think this is something that could be, I mean, it sounds like we might have a little revisiting to do with the PD.
Yeah.
So there's probably some meetings that are gonna have to occur, but probably in the next 4 to 6 weeks to be able to wrap that up. Craig, is that a reasonable?
Yeah, I had the same timeline in my mind.
Okay.
I agree as well.
Okay.
Excellent. Any other parting thoughts before we conclude the work session? All right.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Team from BKV, we appreciate the work on the preliminary study. Let us know what we can do to help with getting it finalized. My colleagues on council appreciate the dialogue and effort across the board going into this. Members of the public, thank you for being here on a wintry night for a little bit of what I took as good constructive dialogue. Appreciate the perspective of a number of you. So item 4, announcements. Our next regularly scheduled city council meeting will be next Thursday, the 27th at 7 p.m. 3rd floor here in Trade Transit 2. Motion and a second for adjournment.
So moved.
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion are accepted. Meeting adjourned. Thank you all.